It was the first week of December in Ravenswood, a quaint small town nestled deep within the frozen heart of rural America. The residents were bustling about, their faces aglow with excitement as they prepared for the most magical time of the year, Christmas. I had returned to my hometown of Ravenswood after several years away, seeking solace in the familiar rhythms and traditions that defined my childhood. My family's old Victorian home stood vacant, a testament to the family tragedy that had driven me away in the first place. The one-swarm facade now seemed oppressive, like a dark specter looming over the snow-covered streets. As I stepped out of the car and onto the frozen sidewalk, a crisp breeze whipped my hair into a frenzy, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and wood smoke. It was as if the town itself was greeting me back into its fold, its festive atmosphere a stark contrast to the melancholy that had settled within me. The streets were already decked out in their winter finery, twinkling lights, garish wreaths, and towering Christmas trees that seemed to pierce the gray sky like shards of glass. It was all so cheerful. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, a sense of unease that seeped into my bones like a cold draft on a winter's night. I took a deep breath and began my trek through the snow-covered streets, my boots crunching in the silence. The houses seemed to loom over me, their windows dark and uninviting, like the empty eyes of old friends. I knew that I had to confront whatever demons had driven me away from Ravenswood all those years ago. As I walked, the darkness began to seep in around me, not just the shadows cast by the flickering streetlights, but a creeping sense of dread that seemed to cling to my skin like wet fur. It was as if the town itself was warning me away, its festive facade a thin veneer hiding secrets and terrors beyond my wildest imagination. And yet I pressed on, drawn by some morbid curiosity into the heart of Ravenswood's holiday madness. Little did I know, this Christmas would be one to remember for all the wrong reasons. As I delved deeper into the heart of Ravenswood, I found myself swept up in a whirlwind of festive activity. Children's laughter echoed through the streets as they chased each other around the towering Christmas trees, their bright red coats and snow hats a blur of color against the monochrome backdrop. The air was alive with the scent of hot chocolate and roasting chestnuts, wafting from the stalls set up on every corner. People bustled about, exchanging warm smiles and hearty greetings as they went about their holiday preparations. The town square was a kaleidoscope of color and sound, a vibrant tapestry woven from threads of red and green and gold. A towering Christmas tree stood at its center, its branches heavy with glittering ornaments that refracted the faint moonlight like 1,000 tiny diamonds. The tree seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it were alive and watching me with cold, calculating eyes. I wandered through the crowd, feeling like a ghost drifting through a waking dream. Everyone seemed to be in a state of heightened euphoria, their faces aglow with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. It was as if they were all waiting for something or someone that would bring the true magic of Christmas to life. As I watched, a figure emerged from the crowd, their presence seeming to draw the very air out of the atmosphere. They were tall and imposing, dressed in a long black coat that seemed to swallow them whole. A bright red scarf wrapped around their neck like a lifeline, and their eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity as they scanned the crowd. I felt a shiver run down my spine as our eyes met, but the stranger barely seemed to notice me. They were too busy scanning the crowd, searching for something or someone that I couldn't see. It was as if they had a hidden agenda, one that only they could see. And yet, despite the sense of unease that settled over me, I felt drawn to them like a moth to a flame. The stranger began to move through the crowd, their eyes fixed on some point in the distance. The people around them parted like a wave, as if they were moving through a sea of molasses. I followed at a safe distance, my curiosity getting the better of me. What was this person doing here, and what did they want? As I watched, the stranger reached out and grasped something from beneath the Christmas tree. It was an old, leather-bound book, adorned with strange symbols that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. The stranger's eyes gleamed with a malevolent light as they opened the book, revealing pages filled with cryptic symbols and diagrams that looked like they belonged in a madman's journal. The air around us grew colder, the shadows deepening into dark, twisted tendrils that seemed to writhe across the pavement. I knew then that something was very wrong, that this Christmas would not be one for the faint of heart. As I watched, the stranger's eyes scanned the pages of the book, their gaze lingering on each symbol and diagram as if they were trying to unlock a hidden secret. The air around us seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, like the buzzing of a fly trapped in a spider's web. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the stranger's fingers trailed across the pages, leaving behind a faint trail of ink that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The book itself appeared to be ancient, its cover worn and cracked like the skin of an old, dried-out apple. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to shimmer and writhe in the moonlight, like living serpents slithering through the shadows. I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as the stranger's eyes locked onto mine, their gaze piercing and unyielding. For a moment we just stared at each other, the only sound the distant hum of Christmas music drifting from the nearby stalls. Then, without warning, the stranger nodded to themselves, as if they had made some sort of decision. They closed the book with a soft thud, their fingers leaving behind a faint smudge of ink on the cover. The air seemed to relax, the shadows retreating like a withdrawing tide. The stranger turned to me, their eyes gleaming with an unnerving intensity in the moonlight. "I'm looking for someone," they said, their voice low and husky like the rustle of dry leaves. "Someone who's been away for a long time." Their gaze seemed to bore into my soul as if they could see right through me to the deepest, darkest secrets I kept hidden. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice in the silence that followed their words. I'm back," I managed to stammer, feeling like a child caught in a web of deceit. The stranger's gaze never wavered, their eyes seeming to bore into mine like cold, unforgiving steel. "Good," they said finally, their voice dripping with an unctuous sweetness that made my skin crawl. "I've been waiting for you." As the stranger's words hung in the air, I felt a shiver run down my spine. What did they mean by waiting for me? And what was this mysterious tome that had captured their attention? The stranger's eyes seemed to gleam with an otherworldly intensity as they reached into their coat pocket and produced the book once more. This time, it was open to a page filled with strange symbols and diagrams that seemed to writhe and twist like living things. "This is an ancient text," the stranger said, their voice low and husky. "One that holds the secrets of our past." The air around us seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening into dark, twisted tendrils that seemed to reach out and snatch at my ankles. I felt a sense of unease as the stranger began to flip through the pages, their fingers trailing across the symbols with an unnerving familiarity. "It's said to hold the power to unlock hidden truths," they continued, their eyes gleaming with an unholy light. "To reveal secrets that were meant to remain hidden." As I watched, the stranger's hands seemed to move of their own accord, tracing patterns on the page with a deliberate slowness. The symbols began to glow with an eerie light, illuminating the dark recesses of my mind and casting flickering shadows across the surrounding buildings. It was as if the book itself was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into my very bones. I felt my heart racing in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I struggled to comprehend the true nature of this mysterious tome. What secrets did it hold? And what did the stranger plan to do with them? As I watched, the stranger's hands seemed to move with a life of their own, tracing patterns on the page with an unnerving familiarity. The symbols began to glow with an eerie light, illuminating the dark recesses of my mind and casting flickering shadows across the surrounding buildings. It was as if the book itself was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into my very bones. I felt my heart racing in my chest, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps as I struggled to comprehend the true nature of this mysterious tome. The stranger's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, their gaze piercing and unyielding. "You see, this book holds the key to unlocking forbidden knowledge," they said, their voice dripping with an unholy intensity. "Knowledge that was meant to remain hidden but has been lost to the ages." As they spoke, the symbols on the page began to shift and rearrange themselves, revealing a message that seemed to leap off the page. It read, "The truth is not for the faint of heart. Are you prepared to face it?" I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stared at the words, my mind reeling with the implications. What kind of knowledge could be so forbidden? And what did the stranger plan to do with it? The air around us seemed to grow colder, the shadows deepening into dark, twisted tendrils that seemed to reach out and snatch at my ankles. I knew then that I had to get away from this place, and from the stranger who seemed determined to unleash some kind of evil upon the world. But as I turned to flee, I felt a hand on my arm holding me in place. "You can't escape," the stranger said, their voice cold and unforgiving. "Not now that you've seen the truth." As they spoke, the symbols on the page began to glow with an intense, pulsing light. The air around us seemed to expand, as if reality itself was being stretched to its limits. I knew then that I was in grave danger, and that I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. As the symbols on the page continued to pulse with an intense, pulsing light, I felt my grip on reality begin to slip. The world around me seemed to warp and distort, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. The stranger's eyes gleamed with an unholy intensity as they leaned in close, their breath cold and rank against my ear. "You see, the truth is not for the faint of heart," they whispered, their voice dripping with malevolence. "It's only for those who are willing to take the leap." I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, as if I was standing at the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of madness. The stranger's words seemed to sear themselves into my brain, burrowing deep into the recesses of my mind like a virus. I tried to push them away, but they only seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. "You can't escape," they hissed, their breath hot against my skin. "Not now that you've seen the truth." As they spoke, the world around me began to dissolve into chaos. The buildings seemed to twist and writhe like living things, their walls melting away like wax in a furnace. The sky turned a deep shade of crimson, as if blood itself was being spilled across the heavens. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling beneath me like jelly. The stranger's hand closed around my wrist, holding me fast as I staggered through the streets. We moved with a slow, deliberate pace, as if we were trapped in some kind of nightmarish parade. Every step seemed to lead us deeper into madness, further down the rabbit hole of the abyss. I knew then that I was doomed, trapped in a world of horrors from which there was no escape. The stranger's eyes gleamed with an unholy light as they led me deeper into the heart of madness, and I knew that I would never be the same again. As we walked through the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every window seemed to stare back at us like empty eyes, every shadow twisted into grotesque grins. The stranger's grip on my wrist tightened as they quickened their pace, leading me deeper into the heart of the city. We passed by street performers who seemed to be watching us with an unnerving intensity, their eyes glinting in the dim light like polished onyx. A group of children playing tag in a park seemed to freeze in place as we walked by, their faces frozen in silent screams. The air was thick with an eerie energy that made my skin crawl, like the whispers of the damned echoing through the streets. We turned a corner and found ourselves standing in front of a decrepit old theater, its facade cracked and worn like a skull's face. The stranger pushed open the creaking doors, revealing a dimly lit interior that seemed to swallow us whole. I stumbled inside, my heart racing with fear, as the stranger led me deeper into the darkness. Every step seemed to echo through the empty seats, making it sound like we were being herded towards some unknown fate. The air was thick with dust and decay, and I could feel the weight of centuries of neglect bearing down on me. We reached a small stage at the back of the theater, where a single spotlight shone down on us like a cold, unforgiving eye. The stranger turned to face me, their eyes blazing with an otherworldly intensity. "You see, this is where the true show begins," they hissed, their voice dripping with malevolence. "This is where you'll be forced to confront your deepest fears." As they spoke, the spotlight seemed to grow brighter, illuminating the dark recesses of my mind like a cold, unforgiving mirror. As the spotlight shone down on us, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The stranger's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, their gaze piercing and unyielding. But it was what happened next that made my blood run cold. The stage behind them began to shift and change, like a puzzle coming together in an unsettling way. Pieces of scenery slid into place, revealing a dark and foreboding landscape that seemed to stretch on forever. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the stranger gestured for me to follow them. "Come," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "Let's explore this place." As we walked through the strange landscape, I saw things that made no sense. Buildings twisted and curved like living things, streets ran in impossible directions, and trees seemed to writhe and twist on the ground like snakes. Every step felt like a journey into madness, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. And then we came to a door. A heavy, iron-bound door with a sign that read, "Do not enter." The stranger pushed it open, revealing a room filled with strange and disturbing artifacts. There were ancient tomes bound in human skin, artifacts that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and devices that looked like they belonged in some kind of twisted science lab. I felt a sense of horror wash over me as the stranger began to rummage through the shelves, pulling out books and artifacts with an unnerving enthusiasm. "Welcome to my home," they said, their voice dripping with malice, "where the true horrors begin." As I watched in horror, the stranger began to read from one of the ancient tomes. The words seemed to leap off the page, filling the air with a malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. The artifacts on the shelves began to twitch and writhe, as if they were alive. I tried to turn and run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The stranger's eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as they continued to read, their voice dripping with malice. The words seemed to be summoning something, drawing it closer and closer until I could feel its presence looming over us like a dark cloud. Suddenly, the air was filled with a deafening roar like thunder on a summer's day. But this was no stormy weather. This was something far more sinister, something that made my blood run cold. The walls began to shake, the floor trembling beneath our feet. I felt myself being pulled towards the stranger as if by some unseen force. They reached out and grasped my wrist, their grip like a vice. "Come," they hissed, their breath hot against my ear. "Let's take this thing for a closer look." As they spoke, the room began to distort and twist like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. I felt myself being dragged deeper into the heart of madness, further down the rabbit hole from which there was no escape. The last thing I saw was the stranger's face, twisted into a grotesque grin as they pulled me towards some unknown horror. And then, everything went black. As I regained consciousness, I found myself in a dark and claustrophobic room. The walls were made of cold, damp stone, and the air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea washed over me, forcing me back onto the hard floor. As my vision cleared, I saw that I was not alone. The stranger stood before me, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. But it was what they held in their hand that made my blood run cold. A small, delicate box made of human bone, adorned with strange symbols and markings that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. "This is the true horror," the stranger hissed, their voice dripping with malice. "The thing that you feared most about me." As they spoke, the box began to glow with an eerie light, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The stranger reached out and opened the lid, revealing a dark and twisted interior that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. And then I saw it. A small, fragile thing, no bigger than a thumb. It was human, yet not human. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its skin seemed to shift and writhe like the shadows on a moonlit night. "This is your daughter," the stranger spat, their voice dripping with venom. "The one you've been searching for all these years." As I watched in horror, the thing began to move, its eyes fixed on me with an unblinking gaze. And then it spoke. Its voice was like a cold wind on a winter's night, sending shivers down my spine. "Mother," it said, its voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." The stranger smiled, their eyes gleaming with triumph. "You see, I've been collecting children for years. Each one is a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the true horror that lies within me." As they spoke, the room began to distort and twist, like a funhouse mirror reflecting my deepest fears. And then everything went black once more. As I regained consciousness for the third time, I knew I had to confront the darkness head-on. The stranger's words echoed in my mind, "You've been searching for all these years." And I realized that I had finally found what I was looking for. But at what cost? I looked around the room, taking in the twisted artifacts and the eerie atmosphere. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of the stranger's gaze upon me. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The stranger smiled, their eyes gleaming with malevolence. "I am the collector," they said, their voice dripping with malice. "And you, dear mother, are the key to unlocking my true power." Suddenly, the room erupted into chaos. The artifacts began to glow with an otherworldly light, and the walls started to close in on me. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to escape. I grabbed the nearest object, a twisted, human-shaped figurine, and flung it at the stranger. It shattered on impact, releasing a blast of dark energy that sent us both stumbling backward. The room began to distort and twist once more, but this time I was ready. I reached out with all my strength, grasping for something just beyond the edge of perception. And then, in a flash of insight, I saw it, the true horror that lay within the stranger's heart. It was a darkness so vast, so profound, that it threatened to consume us all. But I stood tall, refusing to back down. "No," I spat, my voice trembling with rage. "I will not let you have me." The stranger's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment they were taken aback. And in that moment I saw my chance. I lunged forward, grabbing the stranger's wrist and twisting it until their hand was twisted at an unnatural angle. "You may have collected children," I hissed, "but you will never collect me." The stranger's face contorted with rage, but I stood firm, refusing to back down. And then, in a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, I slammed them against the wall, pinning them there. The room stopped twisting and distorting, and for a moment everything was still. And then the stranger spoke, their voice barely above a whisper. "You may have won this time," they said, "but the darkness will always be with you." As I stood over them, panting with exhaustion, I knew that I had faced my fears and come out on top. But at what cost? The stranger's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurked just beyond the edge of perception. Epilogue. As I stood there, panting with exhaustion, I knew that I had finally found closure. The stranger's words still echoed in my mind, but I was ready to face the darkness head-on. I looked down at the stranger, and for a moment, I saw something unexpected, a glimmer of recognition. It was as if they saw themselves in me, reflected back like a twisted mirror. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that this person had been consumed by the very darkness they had sought to control. But I also knew that I had won. The stranger's grip on my mind was broken, and I was free. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. It was a new beginning, one of healing and redemption. I looked around, taking in the familiar surroundings of my own home. Everything seemed different now, as if I had been given a second chance. I smiled, knowing that I would never forget this terrifying journey, but also knowing that I would rise above it. The darkness may have touched me, but it would never define me. Epilogue. Years later, I stood in my own home, surrounded by loved ones. My children played at my feet, laughing and smiling. My husband held my hand, his eyes filled with love and adoration. I looked around, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The memories of that fateful night still lingered, but they no longer controlled me. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. I smiled, knowing that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The end.